Okay. So what we just did is a kind of big, long list. So we did the evolution of government. We talked about it just starting with basic protection of life and then providing a more expansive sense of order. And then over time, it's done more and more and more. It protects rights. It provides you services, everything that you can imagine in terms of a convenience. Government plays kind of a role in it. We expect not only just economic stability, but upward economic mobility. We expect on some level the government to help us come to a consensus on social standards and help enforce those things. There may not be as much universal agreement on that, but I think that you could probably think of issues that we all agree on that we want government to provide a bright line for. So it does all these things. What's expected in return? What are your responsibilities, right? This is where we'll get into a little bit more about citizenship and what are the rights, what are the responsibilities, and what are the ones that go, that aren't necessarily mandated by law but are expected. I like this quote because it helps us kind of, find that line between, citizenship, patriotism, and where it maybe begins to cross the line in terms of overzealousness. The difference between patriotism and nationalism is that a patriot is proud of his country for what it does. The nationalist is proud of his country no matter what it does. So a true patriot is proud of there's all this criticism right now of how we teach history and that we're often too critical of the United States and what it does. And we don't do enough to emphasize the American exceptionalism. I'd like to think that we can do both, that our country does a tremendous amount, especially when compared to other countries in terms of promoting rights and allowing certain freedoms and opportunities. But we certainly have, our blemishes. But I think part of American exceptionalism is the ability to look at those blemishes and say we can do better. And that's part of patriotism as well. To look at our model and say we do well here and we can do better there. Just because you question something doesn't mean that you're not being patriotic. And I think that that's what this quote reminds you of. That you can be proud of what your country does. You don't have to be proud of it no matter what it does. That you don't sacrifice critical thinking. And when you do think about what your country does, it does, I think, engender a certain degree of not just pride, but responsibility. The first creates a feeling of responsibility. The second, a feeling of blind arrogance that leads to war. That if you want these things, if you have an appreciation for what our country does that is good, there are certain responsibilities, right? And again, we broke them down a little differently. There are the ones that you have to do by law. You have to follow the law. You have to pay your taxes. We pointed out that that's a third. You have to register for the Selective Service. Jury duty. Every once in a while you get a notice in the mail that says you have to serve on a jury, and jury duty, serve on a jury. What's kind of funny is as a social studies teacher, I chomping at the bit for this. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a card, I show up, and then I get sent home. And we'll get into this when we do our judicial section, but really what a jury often is for is to force the two sides to come to an agreement in the hall so that they can send everybody home. The vast majority of cases don't make it to trial, but I keep waiting to be on that, 12 Angry Men kind of, scenario where I get to, I don't know if I want that kind of life and death pressure on me, but it would be interesting to see the inner workings of a courtroom. Most people get those cards and they go, they don't want to have to give up a day. But it is part of our civic responsibility. It's unique to get to not just have one party be judge, jury, and executioner. This is one of our safeguards, and it requires some civic responsibility, and you have to go to school. There are truancy laws. Now, you have to go to school. You don't have to do well at it. You can just sit there and breathe through your mouth, right? What's interesting is those are it. For all those 6 things you get, that's all you have to do. And then you get all those things. There are certain things that are hoped that you do above and beyond. And one of the things is not just to show up at school, but is to be well informed. A democracy really depends on a well-informed citizenry. If we are a representative democracy, the representatives are only as capable and as talented and informed as we are. If we don't make good decisions, you don't have good leaders. If you don't have good leaders, you don't have a good system. And that's pointed out in some of these quotes, that if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be. And then I love Franklin. It takes a while to get to it, but this will be the best security for maintaining our liberties. A nation of well-informed men who have been taught to know and prize the rights which God has given them. They cannot be enslaved. It is in the religion of ignorance that tyranny begins. There's a lot, I think, working against us in our civic lives. We don't teach government anymore. I think we have demonized politics to a certain extent. It's thought of, ever since the 60s and Watergate, it's thought of as a kind of a corrupt institution, and maybe kind of rightly so. We've polarized around the parties, and I think media feeds into that narrative. And I think there isn't really been a time in my mind where it's more important to remember that politics is the art of compromise, that it's important to listen to both sides, and it's important to be informed in what you do, because the danger is a broken system that allows for tyranny. Now, hopefully, the informed citizen who sees it as a responsibility then votes. I look at this, you can peek here, but try to do it without peeking. What percent of the American public votes in presidential elections? Those cycles where there's the president up for election every 4 years. Around 50%. What percent vote in congressional elections? Where there is no president. 30 to 40%, right? Most people don't vote. And that is alarming. But given the slide I just showed you, do you want most people voting? Should we make it so that you can vote by just from a laptop? Let's make it real easy. Just click a button, right? Do you think most people would vote in an informed way? Voting and informed go hand in hand. Voting is a right, but it's also a duty, and it typically works best if you do it from an informed fashion. That people ought to know something about their candidate other than the name. And we often do vote on name recognition. Incumbents, the people who hold office, have a decided advantage in getting reelected. Guesses as to how often they get reelected?
90%.
80 to 90. It's 90% of the time on average. So that's distressing. We're going to look at a lot of things in our election system that give us kind of pause for concern, including our voting percentage compared to other countries. What's interesting here is some of these countries have mandatory voting laws. Some of these countries have voting holidays. Some of these countries have no requirements. Who's registered to vote? See, there's step one. Who's eligible to vote? Who's 18? Who's going to be 18 soon, right? So you will all be eligible to vote, but you first have to register. Do you know how to register?
No, on my birthday.
Yeah. Good. Where are you going to go?
Town hall.
Town hall. There's one place. You can do it online. They'll send you the forms, but you want the more immediate. You want the form now, right? So it's a process that's a little tricky that a lot of people don't know how to navigate. We also measure our percentage of voters based on eligible voters, anybody 18 and above. Some of these countries base it on registered voters, the actual population that's gone and registered, that is the more likely population to vote. So keep in mind there's some things that skew it, but later when we look at this, there's some distressing kind of things in these numbers, and it's important maybe to try to figure out how to remedy it. Again, quotes, the ballot is stronger than the bullet. I truly do believe that democracy has a power that is rivals, if not eclipses, sheer physical force. Bad politicians are sent by Washington by good people who didn't vote. You get what you kind of, ask for. And if you don't play a role, then, this is what you get. I love this one. A citizen of America will cross the ocean to fight for democracy, but won't cross the street to vote in the national election. And that's true. You look at elections and the numbers when it rains. It rains. Well, I can't go out in that. I might melt. And voting numbers drop. So weather impacts it. So far I've kind of talked about what is beyond the legal requirements of citizenship. We've just talked about the ones that are in addition, the idea of being informed and voting. This one is really kind of, I don't know, it's a forgotten one. This idea of being civic-minded. And this is another way that I see a reason why we've kind of lost our center to a certain extent, because we're not emphasizing the things that we all hold in common as Americans. I think, being a member of a civic organization, there was maybe more of a trend in that. Having civic conversations, just, what's interesting is you don't talk about religion and politics, but we do. And I wonder how we talk about politics now, whether or not we look at it as an opportunity for open exchange, or does it just become a way of Facebook is a chance to have an argument with somebody you never would have in the first place and unfriending them, right? We often looked for ways to bolster our government through discussions, through being members of civic organizations like the Rotary groups, events. Schools used to always send bands to the parades. The parades used to be bigger. We still do, obviously, the flag salute and the national anthem? Do we do it grudgingly? Did it used to be done with more zeal? Financial decisions in terms of supporting your country. These are the intangibles. And on some level, they all contribute to a civic mindedness and a sense of responsibility to the country. And these are the ones that are, I think, the hardest to pin down. Right? Now, almost there. However, before we can kind of wrap it up and say, that's it. This is what government does, and this is what you're expected in return, and there's your foundational stuff. I think one of the things I pointed out is that economics and politics are inexorably intertwined. And what I mean by that is everyone here is, well, let me put it this way. Not everyone here is going to vote. Even though you're AP students, if I believe the numbers, 50% of the American public will vote. Not everyone's going to take an active role in their civic life. You may not be engaged in conversation about issues directly or through social media. But every single one of you is going to be a consumer. You need to live. And ideally, every one of you is going to be a producer. What we see when we looked at the economics, what block are we in? When we look at the economics is the maximization of the rewards you get as a consumer and producer are going to be directly affected by government. Government is going to affect how well you do in terms of a producer and how much you get to kind of keep in the availability and the cost of what you consume, right? So if government is so inexorably intertwined, really this often is where most of the voting lies. Most people vote their wallet. If you are high income, you are more likely to be conservative and support the Republican Party. If you are low income, you are more likely to be liberal and support the Democratic Party. Most of us vote our wallets. We vote for the party that seems to preserve our economic well-being. And so we got to understand economics to understand politics, all right? So here comes a quick crash course. See if you can guess why that image is up there of economics. I mean, really quick, right? We're only have a few slides here. Our system is what? Capitalist. Do you remember the synonyms?
Free trade.
Free market or free enterprise. Capitalist, free trade, or free enterprise system. The architect, the one that kind of explains the system, is Adam Smith in a book called The Wealth of Nations. And in it, he identifies three kind of primary characteristics of this economic model that go kind of hand in glove together to create an economic stability. Hence the ice cream truck pulling up. Who's driving it?
You.
Mr. Hastings. What's he going to ask you?
What do you want?
What those three things are before you get your super fudgy pop, right? If you didn't have me before, in the 9th grade, I taught this, and I told students I would haunt them about it. I would pop up and I would be coming through a manhole cover with a hard hat saying, psst, what are the three things that characterize capitalism? I would be the lunch lady with the hairnet saying, before you got your bacon burger, we're back to that again, what are the three things that characterize? And I did it as a way to say, this is important, because you have to understand how our system kind of works to understand if it works for you and for others, right? And this is perhaps the most important thing to decide, because this is your economic well-being. This is going to affect your quality of life. So here's your hint. I shouldn't be giving you your hint. What are the three things that characterize capitalism? Private ownership of property. Competition. Freedom in the marketplace. And when I talk about freedom in the marketplace, it's if the government keeps its hands off, if it takes a laissez-faire approach. All right? So here's what I mean by this. Freedom in the marketplace. I picked apple trees or excuse me, private ownership of property. I picked apple trees because you own this apple orchard. That land and the apple tree is yours. And when the apple trees bear apples, you get to keep
Profit that you sell.
The apples.
the apples, the
Good.
fruits.
Check this out early.
Do you remember? The fruits of your labor. Again, you have to understand our system to decide whether it works. In our system, if you get to buy private ownership of property, I don't mean just land. I mean, if you work, you get a paycheck. If you provide a service, you get a benefit to that, right? You get pay for that. And that pay, whether it's in money or whether it's in land, is yours. So I plant the tree, I fertilize the tree, I water the tree, I prune the tree, I depesticize the tree, I get the apples. What is it an incentive for? The harder you work, the more you get. So it's an incentive to what? To work hard. The analogy I always give you is grades are the fruits of your labor. Let's take away grades. Let's take away that 5 on the AP. Are you here? Are you, some of us have an intrinsic love of education. We might show up on a hot July day to do extra work. But if it weren't for grades, if it weren't for the fruits of the labor, if it weren't for the 5s and the A's, would you be here, right? This is an incentive to work hard. It means businesses look to innovate. It means workers look to do more work in terms of overtime and through promotions. Everybody works harder. And that freedom in the marketplace allows you to maximize those rewards. If I have freedom in the marketplace as to where to work and what to buy and what to make, then I can make decisions that are smart, that benefit me. Freedom in the marketplace allows me to maximize decisions, provided government stays out of it. And when Smith talked about it, he called it a laissez-faire approach, which is a French word for leave alone, to let be. The government needs to stay out. The problem with this is these are two narrow, selfish kind of interests, aren't they? I'm looking to keep as much as possible for myself, and I'm looking to make decisions that benefit myself. Well, how does that work out in a world that is selfish? Guess what theory we're coming back to, but in the economic world? Everybody is acting selfishly. Producers are acting selfishly, consumers are acting selfishly. Employers are acting selfishly, workers are acting selfishly. What theory did I say was going to be one of the most important ones? Where I've got competing interests, the pluralist theory. I'm kind of back to the pluralist theory, where competing interests are going to be, this is a really important word, pitted against each other as if they're put into some sort of gladiatorial arena, and they're made to fight. They're pitted against each other, and they cancel, or in this case, balance each other out. All right? And that arguably is what makes our system work. The balance, Smith called the invisible hand. When you have workers that want X and employers that want Y, we arrive somewhere in the middle as if guided by an invisible hand. Price goes to where it should be, wages go to where it should be, working conditions go to where it should be, because everything is balanced as if by an invisible hand. We more formally call it the law of supply and demand. And I tried to show it to you guys way back when with some ridiculous scenarios. So there's a quick visual snapshot where I had one of you deciding to, everyone was staying in Georgetown. You graduated, you're staying in Georgetown, you love it here, you have a suite set up in your parents' basement, there's a hot plate, there's a futon, it smells a little funny down there and it's damp, what the hell, you like it here, right? You're going to stay in Georgetown, you're going to work for Pip's the one factory owner, and he bedazzles jeans. He makes them that rhinestone look's coming back. And so you're going to be a person that puts rivets into jeans and rhinestones then, right? You're going to bedazzle jeans. And everybody wants to work for Pip, right? One factory, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of workers that want a job. Where are wages? Give me fingers. Down, right? Penny on the hour. 24-hour workday. Pip makes you work around the clock. And he gives you beatings every hour on the hour. I don't know why. Pip feels like it's a motivational thing. I give you beatings on the hour. And so what happens is you all say, well, the heck with this. And you go and you start your own bedazzling factories, right? We decide that I'm not going to be a worker. I'm going to be someone who's running their own factory, somewhere you get some sort of venture capital. I don't know where it came from. And just Jack decides, well, I'll just be the worker, right? So now I've got all these factories, but just Jack, right? And we need workers. What does Jack want for wages? Where are fingers this time? Whoa, millions of dollars, $1 million an hour. I want to work a 30-second day. I want a donut bath. I'm going to work 30 seconds, but I expect a break in 15 seconds and a donut bath, right? In each case, I have an imbalance. I don't have interests pitted against each other. I have an imbalance. So bring in the balance. Bring in a situation where I can pit the competing interests against each other, where there is a balance between factories and workers, and what I get is a balance in terms of time and money and benefits, and everybody makes a profit. That is assuming that I take this laissez-faire approach, that I take this kind of hands-off approach, that all of this should work out beautifully. Pure capitalists look at the capitalist model like this ecosystem. Listen, I don't like mosquitoes, and I don't like insects, but do you kill off that population? Or does it break the chain? I don't know if the lion is going to be affected by that, but let's say it is, right? There are birds that eat the insects, and there are things that eat the birds. And cartoons have taught me anything, it's cats, right? And then the dog, and then the elephant. We've got this kind of ecosystem that you don't mess with. And for pure capitalists, you don't mess with it. You leave it alone. You take a complete laissez-faire approach. Well, what did the Industrial Revolution teach us about taking a hands-off approach, right? People were making on average $2 a day. They were working 14-hour days. They were working 6 days a week, and none of this allowed them any kind of, there is a subsistence form of living. They faced horrible health conditions in the factories. They lived in tenements within the cities. The tenements were unsafe. Fires and illnesses, ran rampant through there. There was no happy balance. There were essentially workers initially facing an imbalance, and government did come in and regulate it. And eventually, the Industrial Revolution led to upward mobility for all. But it did arguably take some governmental interference. And if you think of each of my 3 characteristics, we don't have pure capitalism, do we? Do you have complete private ownership of property? You get to keep the fruits of your labor. No, what did I indicate you have to give up?
That was earlier.
That's earlier.
Yeah.
You get salary, you have to give it up in the form of taxes, right? So you don't have complete private ownership of property. Do you have complete freedom in the marketplace? Can you buy and sell whatever you want? No, those things are regulated, right? I often talk about wanting to market big bag of broken glass to kids. I feel like we shouldn't send the bag of broken glass to the Galapagos Islands. We should give kids these shiny, sparkly things to play with in a bag, a nice bag that they can put on their head without a sign saying "Don't do this." Right? I can do that, right? No, my bag has to say "Don't put this on your head. You'll asphyxiate." And can I give them broken glass? Shiny, it's fun, colorful. We regulate what we sell, and you can think of all kinds of things you can buy and you can sell. Can I work people 24 hours a day and give them beatings? Can I do that?
Apparently.
Used to. How about now? Can I pay them a penny an hour? What is there? There's minimum wage, right? And we debate as to, is that high enough? Is it 7 or should we jump it up to 10, right? Can I work them 24 hours a day? There's maximum hour loss. Can I do child labor anymore? No. So I can't sell big bag of broken glass. I can't sell toxic kind of, rancid food. That's a bummer. There's all kinds of regulations in terms of freedom in the marketplace, in terms of what we make and what we consume, right? Competition, do I regulate that? What do you think?
No. Yeah. Well, I don't know.
What happens when you get really good at something? The competition often leads to big companies, right? Monopolies and trusts, right? Can I have those? No. So there are rules about how companies and people can compete, and they basically make sure that the competition isn't so open-ended that it leads to the one company that's too big to fail that, oh my God, Apple can't go away. We just have to, we need Apple, right? We want to make sure that there's competition. So on a near final note, if we understand capitalism, we understand the pros and in some instances the cons. Does our system, the first thing that we have to look at is how much of a capitalist system do I want that it goes unregulated? Will more people benefit if there's less regulation? And that's up to you to decide. Ultimately, on some level, our system is going to potentially make you fabulously wealthy, right? If there's freedom in the marketplace and keeping the fruits of your labor. But does it also have the potential to make you fabulously poor? There's winners and losers within our system, right? So for that reason, it did lead to some other alternative models. And sometimes people muddle these three things, right? Marxism is an idea for a utopian society in theory. Communism is the effort to implement it in practice. And socialism it used to be kind of a synonymous term, but today it's a more moderated approach to communism, right? We have some socialist programs in our country. It drives me nuts when someone calls somebody in our system a socialist because Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, those are socialist programs. That involves a redistribution of wealth and governmental regulation. So it's just, where are you in the spectrum in terms of what we're talking about? So to kind of go back to step one, Marxism is named for Karl Marx, who was a German philosopher who saw the capitalist system as being ripe with inequity. He basically felt it's going to lead to those that are doing well and those that aren't, the haves and the have-nots, the workers and the people that own the means of production. He called the workers the proletariat. The means of production, I mean the things that you need to make stuff. So you need land, you need money, you need capital, you need the raw materials, and there are these wealthy elites that control all of that. And basically what he thought was, eventually, that disparity of people that just own their labor and those that own everything else is going to lead to class tension and warfare. The haves will rise up and they will seize the means of production, the land, the factories, the capital. They'll take this from the wealthy class and then they're just going to share. They're going to create a utopian society. They will essentially take the means of production and collectively own it. The land will be collectively owned. The factories will be collectively owned. Anything of material value will be collectively owned, and we'll just kind of share it. It means that we don't need government. Government will wither away. And how do we make sure that you still get things? Well, it's a utopian society. You basically are going to do what you're skilled at and get what you need. So if you are good at manufacturing, you'll be a manufacturer. If you're good at being a doctor, you'll be a doctor. But you'll both offer your services kind of at no charge and get whatever you need. A quick, simple way of remembering how this works is this quote. From each, according to their ability. This is how a utopian society works. You do what you're good at. To each, according to their needs. Here's the problem. Maybe nice on paper. It doesn't have this ability in our system to be fabulously wealthy, but it means everybody gets what they want, the same kind of level of what they need. But how do I do it? Well, this is where communism comes in. In comes Vladimir Lenin with the communist revolution, and what he felt is that this theory needed a jump start. It needed a kick. It needed what he called a vanguard. Now, a vanguard is the individual or the group that goes out in front. Like on an army patrol, the vanguard is the group that's in the lead, right? You need a vanguard to kind of get this whole thing going. His vanguard was the Communist Party. And they would begin the idea of collectively kind of, taking over everything, taking it out of private hands, and giving everybody what they need. And ultimately, the vanguard, the Communist Party, was supposed to go away. But it didn't. And so the vanguard remains, and it essentially runs the country like an oligarchy. They control the means of production. They give people what they perceive they need. The knock against communist countries typically is you get, what the government gives you, and you got to wait in line for it. There's a line for the toilet paper. There's a line for the groceries. There's a line for this, and there's never quite enough. That what it is doing is giving everybody the same level, but a low level. That's the knock against it. Because it's controlled by the Communist Party, and there's ulterior motives at play, and it's not efficient. It lacks the profit motive. Why would you work hard if you're not getting your grades, if you're not getting a salary, right? Socialism is a bit of a hybrid approach to it. And what socialism, again, these were kind of synonymous terms that eventually became an independent term for a country that kind of partially privatizes things. In other words, certain select key industries are controlled by the government, and that government is controlled typically by the democratic process. So, for example, England. Does anybody, well, let's start a little closer to home, Canada. Anybody know what they have as a socialized program? Arguably we do now. Healthcare. Healthcare is universal. Healthcare is paid for by, your tax dollars, and you get universal access to it. How about in England, in a lot of European countries, what comes kind of technically free after high school? Yeah, your education, college-level education. Paid for, again, by taxes, but available to all, right? So those are great examples of countries that have privatized a particular area, like often in Central and Latin America, they take over the oil industry. That's considered an essential industry that they want to make sure the government is in control of and not in private hands. But again, typically with socialist countries, the government is democratically controlled. Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, those are ways that we redistribute wealth and we guarantee certain standards for people. And the parties that and the governmental officials that determine the level of Social Security, the level of Medicare, Medicaid, they're democratically elected. All right? There's a kind of a quick way of contrasting. It's in music, but on some level, it makes sense. That in communism, you have two cows, the government takes both and gives you the milk. In socialism, you have two cows, the government takes one cow and gives the other to your less fortunate neighbor. That's kind of what we do with socialized programs. In capitalism, you have two cows, you sell one and you buy a bull. Make more cows, right? So with that, meme, or whatever you call this thing, that's that. All right, there's your push. There's your light smattering of golf applause. I like that. I usually just get the, oh, thank God. I'm still recording. I can't get out of this.